Thought we could start here. How do you support a player that's in a scoring slump?
Well, that process, I think, starts far beyond the slump itself as a coach. I think when a player's in a slump, that's when actually the joy of coaching for me comes in. Maybe not the joy necessarily, but the magic of coaching where you really got to rely on the relationship, the trust, the communication you have with that player to help guide them through it. And they have to get themselves out at the end of the day, but it's our job to help them navigate that. And so I think I always resort back to some foundational communication tools that I try to start with the players on that I work with every season, or this year a continuation of that process. But really establishing with the player early on, I like to do an activity where you actually get on the same page of who they are at their best. And you believe it or not, many players, it's hard to just talk about them at their highest self or their best game, what that looks like. They know what it feels like. They know in their heads, but that's where their confidence comes from, right? And so outlining and getting really clear from coach to player of who are you at your best? What does that look like? How does that show up on the ice? And defining that. So I like to sit with the player right away and listen to them and understand them and how they feel about their game, maybe even in ways who they model their game after. But ultimately, I think it creates that blueprint that, okay, this is your strengths. This is what your best game looks like. And then when you start to deviate from that, or you get into a slump, we're thinking about results now, maybe like you said, scoring slump, a sequence of bad games, you can start to isolate those areas. Okay, what's showing up in your game that we know is not you? And how
Yeah.
can we find those little details and sticky points without completely breaking it all down and um, unraveling that whole process? Because as you know, when an 82 game season, they got to turn around the next game or they want to get out of it as quick as possible. So a lot of it for me is the psychology of reframing the situation they're in and bringing them back to what they know they can do and what they can control, because that's ultimately all you can really do. But it has to start with the process at the beginning of really establishing and them being clear, and you as a coach being clear on who are they at their best and helping them access those parts of their games back.
What is that? Can you give some examples of what that looks like? Because I sense that it's probably not a player saying, well, I'm a fourth line winger, that there's probably more nuance in terms of perhaps the details or areas of the ice that they excel in. Um, what does that look like?
Yeah, so obviously you identify the type of player they are and get clear on what their role is, what their responsibility is, what's the ask of them for the team, and what success looks like for them within that role. And so, if you want to take an offensive top six player as an example, maybe a centerman. So, okay, what's the best game look like? I'm possessing pucks. I'm attacking inside in the offensive zone. I'm winning my face-offs. I'm moving my feet and I'm joining out of the defensive zone to create rush looks for myself. I'm owning pucks in the offensive zone, winning my 50-50s, not thinking, even the mental side of it, how they feel. Those pieces go into the layers of what their best game looks like, but identifying, okay, these are the measurables. Um, and then I always from that plan, it's like, okay, great. We now know what your strengths are, who you are at your best. You can also then identify the gaps and those areas of opportunity
Yeah.
in order for you to be operating at this point, or for it to look like this. Here's your weekly priorities or your details within practice or after practice, pre-practice. If these are areas that are somewhat um, challenges for you, or picking pucks off the wall and attacking inside, then let's rep out some of those things when we can, and kind of creating that framework of development that surrounds their process to be performing at their best. But ultimately, it's feeding who they are and understanding who they are, because that can look very different, like you said, for maybe a more defensive forward,
Sure.
where it's about creating energy and those 50-50 battles, and it's about a mentality. And then you're looking at video with them after of like, okay, let's look at all your shifts, all your 50-50 pucks. How many times did you come out with the puck? Oh, well, you lost that battle, so is it a preparation thing? Is it a mindset, or is it actually something you're not doing, body positioning, or how you're skating onto pucks, and those types of looks. So just looking at those details with them, but it starts early on, getting on the same page together.
You just mentioned, you know, you watched a lot of tape last year. You're starting to watch a lot of tape again. You know, goals show up in a lot of different ways. And when we look at the elite players in the National Hockey League, there's such a spectrum of skill sets and perhaps how they create offense. Is there any underlying habits or tells that you would say that most offensive players excel in these areas across the board?
Right. Well, I mean, we could talk all day on that specifically. I think key principles for me, the best goal scorers or the most dangerous players in the offensive zone are the ones that want the puck, keep the puck, or know how to get it back or distribute it and find a way to get it back. I think that's a mentality. That's a foundational thing that applies to every level, not just the NHL. But perimeter, no good. On the yellow, no good. Unless you're just a distributor, and I'm strictly talking goal scoring here
Sure.
specifically. So, I think being pushed to the outside, wanting to play on the outside, it can be a skill game, a creative game. You can create looks, but if you're wanting to talk strictly goal scoring, the willingness to get inside. And so I always talk with our guys about finding white ice, identifying the scoring ice. And in order to do that, obviously as a coach, it's pre-scout related too at times, being able to break down their defensive structure where they're weak, right? Where they
Yeah.
defend the dot well? Okay, there's that scoring pocket inside where our F3 needs to work to. And are we going there? Do we have a plan to work there, to stay there, a willingness to get inside? And it's the same thing with the net front, something we talked about a lot in the American League is like, what is your plan of going to the net? Getting to the net, staying at the net, and then when to release from the net, because there's reads there and there's decisions that are really important around puck support, getting the puck back, but then a willingness to like, give me the puck. I'm going to the hard areas and I'm going to the goal scoring areas. Like that's something we talked a lot. That's where championships are won, around the net. But you have to have a plan. You have to have a purpose. And I think ultimately the best goal scorers are always working the offensive zone with purpose, and it's a hunger and it's a desperation of, I want the puck, I'll do everything to get the puck back, own pucks, 50-50 pucks, um, all of the things where it's that beast, and you see it in players where it's like, man, they're so hard to defend because they're always shot ready. They have a plan every
Yeah.
time they're going to that ice, and that's what makes them dangerous because it's not, 2-3 seconds. It's on and off their stick, and it's in the back of the net. That's when you know it's a true goal scorer.
I came across a great clip of you. You were mic'd up in practice and you were talking to a couple of players and you were talking about the communication offensively. And I sense that, communication is great, but communication can create a lot of noise or it can be really constructive and clear. Do you have any insights to what good communication sounds like on the ice?
Between players specifically,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you see, we always challenge our guys to have meetings as lines, or we'll do video as their lines are, or who they're playing with, specifically to challenge that communication to make it
Yeah.
make sense, because certain guys don't want as much, want reads, want to read and react off of each other, and other guys want, like, if you're going let's find those verbal cues, or I know you're doing this and I'm doing this, just based on the way their games work together. Um, and so it's about figuring that piece out, how that looks between each personality and player. And then the next part, I think, is also understanding their skill sets, within that process, because some of our guys, I think about, Matty Beniers, Capo Caco, Jane Schwartz, that line last year. They were kind of always, they were like replaceable parts. They've really figured out, okay, if he's going here, I'm reloading. We're going to create this, triangle type offense, and we're going to play the grind game low, and we're going to try to generate low, and when we can't, we're going low to high, and we're going the net. Like, they had more, you know, actionable cues with their groups. So it was
Yeah.
finding, and again, there's parallels across our whole team with that example, but I just think it's those little details, and then figuring out the balance of when they actually need to be challenged to communicate. Because when shit hits the fan, or they're one's
Yeah.
having a bad game, that's when they need each other most, to be able to say, hey, like, if you just get that puck deep, I'm going to go get it. We're going to get it back, and boom. And now it's like that communication changes everything with the next shift or the rebound shift, right? But if you don't have it at all, then it starts to feel like we're in silos, working maybe against each other versus for each other, where we can actually elevate.
2 years ago, the Kraken finished 29th in goals for. Last year, you moved up to 16th in the league. I sense that, particularly in the National Hockey League, that improvement isn't a result of one thing. It's probably a combination of a lot of things, and oftentimes it's the non-obvious. And as you prepare for this new season, what are some of the areas that you might focus on, perhaps early in training camp, where you say, we want to either really reinforce these good habits that we had last year, or, here's maybe another layer or two that we can add to our game offensively?
Yeah, it's good when you see success start to happen, when you instill new ideas, concepts, I think, within a team. Structure or system, the buy-in to play within that system, starting from the offensive red in. That's where the offense starts, right? Whether it's a rush look, putting a puck in deep, getting it back, having a plan to get it back. I think the best teams hold on to pucks and don't give it up. But there's, you look at the Carolinas and the forechecking teams that always, even Florida, rimming pucks, they always have a plan. So they play that game to their strength. And so, when I think about our group, and the layers, how we can continue to generate more offense and be just a team that's really hard to shut down offensively, is, I think, giving the identity to each line, from first line through the fourth line, of what that looks like for them and how they can be creative within that structure. Because ultimately, like, players are so good, you don't want to coach and or strip the creativity out of them. Like, they're the ones playing the game, and it's way faster at ice level than anyone sees from the stands or above. That they're the ones making the reads, seeing the game in action, and therefore it's finding ways to give them, I think, I don't want to use the word restraints, but it's, here's the parameters of how our
Sure.
game and our identity as a team looks. Whether we generate low, we use the back the net, or when we go low to high and we're generating from the top from our D, here's here's what we need to see. And that's something that I love coaching, is the details within the system. My brain is always, from back to when I started teaching skating, is always thinking on a very much a micro level, and kind of creating those actionable bites. And so with the guys, I like to challenge them to their own game of, like, hey, when you're getting inside, look what happens. Like, now you've created a second layer. You got a tip on that. There's a grade A chance, second rebound. If you don't go there, it's just those details within the identity of how we're trying to, as a team, collectively generate offense, that are big, I think, difference factors as a team. And so it's challenging each individual, as a coach, and then their lines, to embrace that identity and play for each other with those details.
I'm curious. You mentioned like the holding on to pucks and the puck management part of the game, and I think so often, how that shows up maybe in minor hockey, for example, is you've got one kid that's just great on his edges, can get the puck and cut back, and they hold on to it all by themselves. And I mean, the players that can accomplish that in your league are few and far between. But for example, you mentioned Carolina, who's a team that seems to accomplish that maybe the puck's not always on their stick, but they've got a plan with it, and they're able to wear teams down. It almost becomes a bit of a war of attrition, which I imagine plays out over 82 games or in a 7-game series. What are some of the details in puck management that you think are really important?
Well, depending on the scenario you want to examine, I think when you think about just the offensive zone, specifically owning pucks, holding on to pucks, knowing how to protect pucks, and I think this is where understanding the environment of which, we want to keep the puck. Okay, so I think teams start to break down after about 15 seconds in the defensive zone. If you can just
Yeah,
grind them down for a solid 10 to 15, even if that means rimming, releasing to the back of the net for the next guy
yeah,
to take over and control it, and you keep that possession, you go low to high, if you don't have an opportunity to get inside or to cut a seam to take it inside, that's when the defense starts to break down. That's when I think the details and the mistakes start to happen, and they definitely start to happen in an 82 game schedule or back to backs in the number of games we play. But for me, it starts with understanding, okay, how do you manipulate the defensive structure?
yeah,
Where are their deficiencies? Where are their exchanges? Where now you might have some time and space to make a play or to manipulate them to create a lane for yourself or break them down. Or secondly, invite the pressure and take it on so that you can win that grind battle in the end. Someone said to me early on in the American League, simple, and I'm assuming everybody's heard this at some point. If they haven't, even at the youth level, it's like, who's if you put two players head to head and you want to know who the better player is at the end of the day, if you're evaluating, throw a puck in the corner and see who comes out with the puck. That's the better player. Whoever
yeah.
wins that
So
puck
true.
finds a way, right? To with
Yeah,
body positioning, stick detail, cutting through hands. Sometimes it's a smarter player, not the faster and stronger, or it is the faster and stronger that knows how to use their feet, use their body to shield. So ultimately, all of those things are things we're talking about with our guys. The details within just winning pucks, holding on to pucks, and then transporting and really elevating the next look is where it gets really fun offensively.
So if you were advising a coach and you're looking for those kinks in the armor defensively, and you're say watching tape, would I think so often you get we view defensive structure as a static thing, right? We see pucks in the corner, how does the team set up? But would maybe the insights that you're looking for happen when you can watch how they might shift from east west in the zone, or what happens when the puck, and looking at how they adjust to how the puck moves, and that's where you're going to find those opportunities.
Yeah, so parts for me that where it sticks out right away on the inside is the dots. Typically where F3 lives, that's usually there is a share happening there with, and I
Yeah,
pucks in the corner low, and I'm thinking about the defensive team. Their strong side wing is responsible for the top, but some teams like to cut the top off so they deny the low to high, which then creates a little bit of a leaky space inside the dots where if your F3 can get in there shot ready, you can either use them as a release point or a quick, obviously, shot option. That's the soft area that I like to train our guys to funnel up and funnel into so that that awareness and that read changes for who's covering you. That's number one. You see a lot of teams on the strong side, especially just attack from the dot. The next area would be anytime you're winning pucks, owning pucks low, and you start to climb up the wall, that hash mark. Sometimes teams, depending if they're man on man or if they're a pressure support coverage team, there's oftentimes a D and center exchange there. So there's
yeah,
a pull off, and you can create time and space, I think, to actually invite that pressure and manipulate it, whether it's with cutbacks or you see the best players. I think of Jesper Bratt. He's just always changing angles and then, climbing and manipulating just that area alone, whether he goes low or high with it or directly cuts the seam. That's the ice you want to get into. Um, and then I think the last area would be just, getting off the wall and either funneling up high where you have 3 or 4 high scenarios and you pull the coverage away from the net and you just funnel pucks to the net, and then you're creating the box out pictures where there's sort outs happening around the net and whoever can get inside the quickest. We struggled a lot with that when we played Hershey back-to-back years in Coachella. Was just the way that, they would pull us away from the net and just throw sifters in and try to beat us inside and those areas. But the back of the net would be the last area too, using the back of the net, changing sides. So whether you're, rim releasing pucks to change sides, anytime you think you can flip the defensive structure upside down, you're creating reads inside and those pass out opportunities into the slot with movement from the other parts, whether it's forwards and D. You can get lost in behind, and that's where I think those soft areas start to develop.
You had Shane Wright last year, who you would have had in Coachella the year previous. Matty Beniers obviously is a frontline player for you, but young players, and camp will tell. But it appears that there's a high likelihood there'll be an injection of some other young forwards in your group, perhaps a Yanni Neiman or a Berkeley Canton. What did you learn just observing, Maddie and Shane last year, that you would say to these incoming or potential incoming young players to say, hey, like, we don't know how much you're going to score, but here's some of the areas of the game that you're probably going to have to really pay attention to swim in the National Hockey League?
Well, that I think is the most important piece for every younger player that we trust, I think, within our process and our team and resource of staff that, from the second they get to the American League and even before that, essentially when they get drafted, the process of who they are, why they've been chosen by the Seattle Kraken. Like when you get to camp, don't try to reinvent yourself. I was with Shane, like even in Coachella, I'm like, your skating is what separates you. Your skating is what makes you a goal scorer. When you're using your feet, when you're joining, when you're impactful with your skating, whether it's to get pucks back or to get it in the rush, or to transport it out of the zone, that's your biggest weapon. So challenging him to be very focused on just being who he is. Same thing with Maddie. We talk about this a lot, and even at the end of the season, Maddie and I sat down and we watched every primary scoring chance he had for the season. We watched every second
Really?
chance together, and we went through and we categorized every single type of chance that he had last year, which was a lot.
Yeah, no kidding.
Secondaries with the way he plays. He's so smart. But we looked at all the ways that he generated offensive looks for himself. And it was very interesting activity to do together because pretty quickly by percentages, we could see, I don't want to go too much into Maddie's game for the sake of protecting Maddie, but more so just interesting to look at, okay, here's actually where you need to get to be. And we need you to hit the net from this spot, these spots, these pass out type looks, because um, oftentimes, he's from a good defensive positioning. So it's then looking at, okay, here environmentally is where you're landing. So how can we create more of these looks for you to now translate that to not just obviously to goals, but to executing and creating more volume from there. And so it's simplifying their own game with them by breaking it down in a very meaningful and measurable way. So these younger players, like you mentioned at Berkeley, like this is who you are. This is the core of your makeup, and this is how you're going to have success at any level. But you may be asked to play a different role. So how can you still use skill sets and your resources to be an impact player, whether you play 7 minutes or 12 minutes? You look at a Yanni Neiman, obviously he came up last year. He was an offensive weapon in Coachella Valley. Power
Yeah.
play guy has a heavy shot. He got an opportunity here to show that. But when you're not on the power play, if the game presents no special team opportunities, how are you a shooting threat? Okay, so 5-on-5, how does that look for you, Yanni? And I think that those are the types of pieces where when they can figure that out and have confidence within themselves to play to their own game and not get lost in constantly processing the pace of how fast everything's happening at the NHL level. and how how their mistakes will end up potentially in the back of the net and to not get deflated so quickly in that process is just, I think, the maturing pro mentality you start to see. And that definitely happened with Ryder from start of season to the end of the season. It was awesome to see.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Man, and the name is escaping me, and I wish if I'll try and if it comes to me, I'll mention it. But I was reading recently that in the NBA, there's a gentleman that has come up with a way to basically do a physical analysis of players, and he can link that to the skill set on the court. So for example, Luca, they realized
Mhm.
he can't jump,
Right.
but he has this amazing ability to speed up and slow down. So
Right.
when he entered the league, they just started tailoring his game around saying, hey, like, don't even try and jump up and hit threes, just like accelerate to the defender, slow up, and then drain the shot. And obviously that's worked really well for him. But I wonder how much of that starts translating into hockey, especially when we've sort of, the games change where we've gone from having like really defined skill players and then players that maybe aren't contributing as much with skill, where it just seems like now even your depth players can skate, they can make plays, and that seems to be how you wear teams down.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think about something that's really important. I've done a lot of reflecting on that, this kind of exact thought process as a coach. Um, I've been doing some mentorship with Ken Hitchcock, and I was actually talking with Andrew Ladd a few weeks back around, um, as a coach, and this goes, I think, at any level, and I've experienced this both as a player and definitely as a coach. And it's something I try to be very cognizant and aware of is how easy and quick we are as coaches because it's our job to judge players and coach them up or put them in a box. And I think it's a
Totally.
slippery slope because when your job is to coach a player, naturally you're gonna love them and hate them at times when they're doing, the things that they can do well, and then they're not, that's what coaching is. That's the true essence of our job. But it's you have to have the right, I think, way of looking at it because I think players, especially role players, get put in a box way too early around their skill sets, and that development process, you know, dwindles away or gets lost. In the process, for their own player, and then the opportunities are less, the identity of that player shifts completely away from how they could actually be a resource, to you, and I wanna say that that's kind of something I've analyzed and been thinking about a lot since early on when I started in player development to the American League and saw the process of younger players and veteran players and how their role and their identities look, but, um, something Andrew said to me is like, "You cannot judge and love a player at the same time." And it's the
Love that.
truest thing ever. You cannot at the same time love them and judge them. You have to consciously choose to, "Okay, this is frustrating me, but I'm not going to put you in the grinder box that's all you can do. I'm going to coach you
Yeah.
through these maybe areas that are holding you back from not possessing and holding on to pucks so you can play more of a possession game or a playmaking game." And it's awesome because I lived that firsthand with some like John Hayden, who, in the American League, unbelievable player, can play all scenarios, offensive, and when it comes up to, the NHL too, he embraces every role, whatever that looks like, and he's able to adapt and shift his own game, get stuck in like, I can only do this. And I think, he's a great example of someone that we all need to kind of, you know, think about our own approach as coaches when we do that, because you can lose your own assets quickly if you put them in a box and leave them there.
Well, I don't know if you got time to fit a book in before training camp, but I would highly recommend The Why is Everything. This just came out. So it's about how Kyle Shanahan, who's the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, when he was the offensive coordinator in Washington, they had Sean McVay, head coach of the Rams, Mike McDaniels, head coach of the Dolphins, Matt LaFleur at Green Bay, and others. And it just talked about how they had this mindset that in football, a coach would have a really defined way to play. and the players had to fit into that box. And these guys just, sitting in the coach's office said, like, what if we designed a system where it was flexible enough where we could identify the strengths of players, and we could adapt to them so they could showcase what they do best without us having to, reconfigure how we play as a team. It's fascinating, and I think of it because, I read that, when you were a player, that, one, it seemed like you were destined to be a coach from a really young age, and that you were essentially coaching yourself, but that you would, you were really proactive in trying to address what you felt were your weaknesses. And that at some point along the line, you got some advice that said, hey, like, don't forget what your strengths are, and don't forget to play to that. And I think that,
Too late.
I think that's great for players to hear, but I also think it's really good for coaches to hear and parents to hear, because so often we just focus on what players can't do, instead of what they can.
Right. Or you think of the constructive feedback process, and that is the balance. And you need to take feedback and work at parts of your game, but then never losing sight of who you are at your best and what makes you, separated from the pack. Because if you get away from that, then everyone starts gaining on you and you're no longer able to separate yourself.
Totally. Um, we were going back and forth a few weeks ago, and I commented, like, I mean, you had a really busy off season, and
Yeah.
we'll go into what year one was, with Seattle last year, but I just wonder, like, when the season wrapped up, I know that you went overseas, hopefully you had some time to decompress, but when you had that opportunity to finally reflect, was there anything that you said, hey, like, when we get to camp next year, here's an area that, I want to gain more knowledge in, or an area where, I'm going to reach out and, find some mentors to try and, find areas where I can add another layer to your own game.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a huge amount of, I think, off-season, processing, reflecting on what I think went well, what I think, you anticipate. The American League is the best league in the world to prepare players and I think coaches for the National Hockey League. I truly believe that. But I think until you're actually in it and you're in the schedule and the demands of the amount of games and how travel looks and West Coast travel for us, until you're really in it, you can prepare mentally and you can think, but I think that after reflecting after 82 games, I was able to really, okay, step away from it and look at it more from a helicopter perspective of, okay, this is how my process looked day to day. This is what my responsibility was. Here's the ways of which now, knowing where we had a lot of success. It's funny you even asked the question about the offensive side. I'm like, oh, interesting, because there were certain things that we did as a staff, or, I thought maybe do differently or better, that I've reflected on of, okay, this is how I'm going to approach it with these guys. You really figure out the people along the way and those relationships
Yeah.
just overnight. Like, training camp is 4 days long before we start playing preseason games, right? So,
Wild.
like, yeah, it's unbelievable. I always, like, I thought about it last year, after the 5th day we're playing games, and I'm like, it's literally you punch all this information into them. And yes, a lot of it is same information communicated a different way than many different teams and coaches they've had. But you punch it all into them, you give it all into them, and you're just at that point, you just trust that that's gonna marinate, and as a coach, you have to be so clear and dialed with it you give them, I think, early on, because that's what sticks as the foundation. And so, that's something I've thought about, is how simple we can actually make it going into training camp, because I think simple and stupid simple actually works. Not in terms of how the game is played, but making it so, action oriented and detail oriented, where you can actually create that standard, and those communication points of how your identity as a team is going to look, and instead of inundating with all this information. And that process happens all year long. It's like, if you just keep inundating players with coaching, something even Steve Breer taught me is, like, stepping away from the players and letting them play and not always coaching them.
Yeah.
That is coaching too, and knowing and really understanding that relationship. And so it just comes back to communication. And I've felt, over the course of this year or this past year. In my first season, communication has always been, I think, a strength for me as a coach, and kept me grounded in my style of coaching. But even then, I'm like, not maybe reinventing the way I want to communicate, but I want to create different ways of accessing each of the players now that I know their games and I've watched their games and seen their, their strengths show up in the areas where we need them to be better. And I'm going to try to approach that differently.
Okay, well, speaking of communication, so here's my introduction to Jessica Campbell. So obviously, we're over at the WHF Coaching Symposium, and we host events all the time. And I think it's not a secret that public speaking is generally not most people's favorite activity. And we get a lot of high level coaches and people in sports that come to our events and speak. And generally, like, we've got a green room, people are back there, they're pacing, they're reading their PowerPoint, like it's nerve, and I go through it too. It's not easy. So we're at the WHF, we've got this table in the back of the room. I don't know, there's probably 300 coaches there, and you're at the table. I don't know you, I don't want to bug you, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, is she not going to get ready for this talk she's about to give? Like, she's just like doing it. And I was like, what is going on? But you went up there, and this isn't lip service. Like, it was excellent. Like, it's for anybody who wants to watch it, it's on the coach's site, and it blew up when we released it. But, I think it was the clarity. And, I sometimes don't like the word simple, because I think the process of taking something complex and distilling it down where it's digestible, it's not simple. And again, I don't know how long that presentation took you, but it was really clear that there was a process that had gone into just distilling that information down. And coaches don't go to coaching university. Those skills are generally acquired through other experiences in their life.
Mhm.
What do you think kind of has lent itself to you being able to communicate clearly?
Well, I think, you know, I was very fortunate to go to Cornell and study communications and business. So I had a lot of opportunities to not study hockey coaching communication, but oral comm, visual comm, strategic communication, persuasion,
Yeah,
all media comm, all different types of ways that communication happens and how it shows
yeah,
up. And so I guess I spent 4 years trying to develop, a thinking process around how to communicate in impactful, influential ways. And then when I was challenged, in the coaching space, all we do is stand up in front of rooms and guys, and we're whether it's one on one, and whether we like to believe it or not, we're salespeople, you know, bel-
totally. Yeah,
and you know the broken car salesman or whatever is trash, but you want to believe in what you're selling, and in order to believe in what you're selling, you need to actually stand by it, believe in it, understand it, and that's where I think the conviction in what you know and what you believe is often received or on the other end of it, and that comes with preparation and time and diligence, or doing the due diligence to actually dive into it, right? Um, but something, it's funny you referenced that presentation. I At the end of the season, I was working with our power play last year, and you're watching playoffs and you're watching, the teams go all the way, and that's where you start to look at. And so at the end of the season, I sat with our video coaches. I downloaded every goal that was scored throughout regular season, power play wise, every team in the top half of the league, and I just broke them down and categorized them and went through and analyzed what the best teams are doing, what we did well, what we didn't do well. But I was able to get a very clear picture on how, not just the power plays are having success, but what the PKs are presenting. And, you're looking at it all season long as a coach, and you're doing it game by game. But when you can step away and do more study, then you can really create that micro breakdown of, okay, here's the clear things that are standing out to me. And then from there, whether it's building a presentation or not, I always think it's it's not what you know, it's how you say it.
totally.
And
Yeah,
that's on every level. I can go up to a player and say something really complex to them, and that player might got it. The next guy could say the exact same, and they have no clue. You know, I would always make a joke in Coachella Valley with Andrew Podorowski. It could be like, "Hey, you're climb, go downhill, open up, push," and it was like power play language with him. You just go out and,
Yeah.
but then if I did that to a younger player, they would be lost in the process of, wording or whatever. So it's just about simplicity. Like you said, simple is digestible, and with layers that make sense to them, whether it's visual. Um, I use all things, as you could see, colors, words,
Yeah.
buzzwords, concepts, come up with things that make sense and mean something to them. So it's memorable and it resonates, so that when we are in those moments where they have to make those reads, something sticks. And that's part of our job as coaches, is to figure out how you can make it stick with each player within your collective team.
Totally. So in that presentation, and I don't often do this at these events, but it was like probably 5 minutes, and I reached in my backpack and I grabbed my notepad. I'm like, I'm gonna actually pay attention to what's going on here, just because of my own little U9 current coaching career. But the number one thing I took away is you had talked about how at the end of the day, the best power plays are unpredictable. And I look at Edmonton, for example, where I think that exists, but they've got some chess pieces at their disposal that maybe not everybody does. So that's maybe not the best example, but you talk about that process of cutting up all the tape, categorizing all the goals. I think the instinct for a lot of coaches is to say, okay, I've got all this new information. Now let's go play Madden on the power play and just line it up. How do you balance that? Hey, we've got some strategies here, some things that clearly work, and we want to implement these, but we also don't want to become predictable or robots where teams can just figure us out before the puck even drops.
Yeah, that's, I think, the biggest thing you have to do, or at least what I've learned, that's given our groups success, is take inventory. So just like you're pre-scouting the other team, you have to pre-scout your own units, as in, what does your personnel look like? You know, at any level, maybe you have a really heavy one-timer shooter. Not everyone has an OV on their team. Maybe you have, like a Jared McCann, a true downhill shooter that can score from there. But then, and then you're looking at, okay, are they pass first? What do your goal line net front guys look like? Are they more tactful around the net? Are they better releasing and making plays? What is your skill set, power play skill set? And then from there, your power play, and this is something we talked about a lot and something we're going to continue to talk about a lot. Your power play has to have an attacking mentality. At the end of the day, shooters score.
Yeah.
But shooting can also be a low play, taking pucks to the net, driving inside, right? So you can have more of a playmaking attacking mentality, or just a heavy shooting, mentality, where you have numbers and you play the numbers game, whether it's low or creating secondary chances, and you look to create pace and puck movement off of, breaking down PKs, just like we're talking 5-on-5, breaking them down and then exposing them. But ultimately, if there's no attack mindset and you just pass the puck around for 2 minutes,
Yeah.
or you hope to, you looking for the perfect play or the perfect goal. Because believe it or not, when I was looking at all of, the ways teams are scoring, is it's these bouncing secondary looks in the slot where it's cleanup. It's the guys, our top goal scorer this year on our power play, our leading goal scorer was Jaden Schwartz, our net front guy. And all credit to Jaden, and he continues to do it. He stands there. He knows when he needs to flash, when he needs to screen. He knows when he needs to release, make the low plays, and then it's just a willingness to stick in the paint, right? So he's a great example of just how you can have success. And so if you're not thinking about the word attack from the very beginning of your power play, and then how your inventory of players skill sets can create attacking looks, they might have two different identities. Um, and I've seen teams that move a lot, like the Edmontons, but they can, because that's how they're their skilled players take over. Uh,
Yeah.
and other teams break down because they're concerned about where Connor McDavid and Draisaitl are. Whereas you look at Jersey, another, again, tactful, crafty, smaller, forward group, but movement and
Yeah.
off of each other and just getting pucks. And, they all can shoot it, but it's not Ovi standing there hammering one timers until you take that away and you have a 5-on-3 on this side. So
Yeah.
it's just all about your personnel, and then not just getting, okay, here's this guy's our flank, this guy's our bumper. Because someone like a Matty Beniers, he can play all spots and he's good in all spots, but he's definitely stronger in certain areas. So finding those pockets so they can have success and work together.
Where do you start? And I partly say this just because we collect a lot of data at the coaches side, and one of the search queries that comes up a lot is how to work on the power play in practice. And I sense particularly for a lot of youth coaches, they maybe get stuck from just sort of these static uh, passing patterns, or it's just we do 5-on-0, or you go 5-on-4, but then that kind of breaks down. Do you have any recommendations of just maybe ways to develop a little bit of cohesiveness while not having half the team on a knee at the blue line while the power play does their thing?
It's tough. I think the power play, special teams in general, are the hardest thing to practice and work on, because when you look at it, you typically, if you want to work on them together, you want your PK guys to kill against power play, but you also, in our situation, you don't want the power play, and they're not going to bomb it at each other, and willing to shoot through shin pads and at risk of hurting each other because we need to play the next day against each other. And also some of our top killers are also power play guys. So you have to get creative, and you have to, again, look at the dynamics of your team. Something that I think on any level you can do, and we do a lot of it in training camp, is there's, I call them power play shots. So we do 5 to 10 minutes, because guys want to work on their shot, but you route them in the plays, and I always do high plays and low plays. And so you typically have them in their spots or starting spots, and the puck always starts on the flank, and you go 5 pucks starting from that point in and out of the bumper, use their outs, whether it's low, middle, top, and then it activates a high look, so up, over, shot. But instead of just the shooter is the only detail, you focus on the details of everybody else around. So your net front's working on a flash screen for the shot, your bumper, if it's a high tip, their route of presenting a high tip, skating the routes with intent, so that if you're doing something 5-on-0, it's not useless for all 5 guys and without pressure, but you're skating routes that are going to happen. And those details are really important, because if you're shooting pucks outside the dot, is it that dangerous of a look anyways? So you're coaching the positional details and the timing and the arrival and the net front presence. And then obviously the passing execution. I always tell our guys 2-3 passes. If it's not clean, restart. Like, let's go again. Make sure
Yeah.
we like the look. If it's bouncing, if it's crappy, do it again
Yeah.
until we feel good about our flow. Because then you start creating
Nice.
rhythm with each other. And then, we did it a lot in the American League, is guys would hop on, and I wouldn't just have only power play guys. If guys hopped on, they would jump in on the power play routes, and we'd rotate. So now the look changes based on the hand and the passing decision. Oh, now I'm passing up and over to a downhill lefty. So now where are my reads? How does that change if I'm passing to a one timer? And just those little details, I think, elevate the skill with repetition, and it's easy to do. That's one area. But then creating small area, high and quick reads. We do something where we'll bring both groups together, because I find power play is better together. Challenge each other, and when they're watching each other and they're resting while the other group's going, and then you really embrace and you give an identity to your role guys to help
Yeah.
special teams. Like, I would grab our you know whoever was in and out of the lineup, our guys that are maybe PK guys or not, I would really empower them to be part of the power play process, because they're for the team. And
Yeah.
they were guys that would come out and they'd kill, and they would get after the power play guys. They'd be chirping them, we'd have some fun with it where instead of us as coaches pressuring them and they're, making 50-50, half-ass passes around us, they were actually competing and against each other. So that unit would go, they rest, but we would work on our outs. So it's hard to talk about the scenario of those, but they were basically little small area games, 40 seconds tops, in and out, and then
Yeah.
next group goes and challenge them to a game, like first group to score 3 goals, first group to score 5 goals, and then it's done. And that's within 10 minutes. And now there's pace, there's intent, and then there's also a translatable piece that when we get into practice and we split and we go live, you start to see some of those things. Okay, it's starting to look better and better.
Yeah, and I would imagine a great start to practice as well, just to get everybody on point.
Yeah, and the goalies like it. The goalies like it too because their key goalie looks right, especially when you go from 5-on-0, the power play shots, and then live. Those are the reads that they need to be square to their shots and their looks. So you got to work with your goalie coaches too on that.
Totally. Um, let's go back to I think it was around 2019. You're in Kelowna, so you grew up in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
You went to the Pursuit of Excellence as a young player, and then obviously went to Cornell afterwards. But you returned to Kelowna and you start up a skating coach business. I think a lot of coaches come up and their lens of the game is, you know, the camera angle from the score clock where they see the whole ice and they just see the chess pieces moving around. I think other coaches have the opportunity to work on the mechanics and they gain they start seeing the game through a much more granular lens in terms of its mechanics. It's things like posture, it's hand positioning, and I think that, you know, oftentimes, and I sense this is where our game is slowly migrating to, is that, you know, the most effective feedback might not be, hey, you know, stand 2 feet that way. It might be like, hey, you're bobbling the puck because your hands are too tight to your body. And you can change that, or your posture, or you know what, let's go and work on your edges so you can protect the puck better. Those types of things. So I guess my question is like in hindsight, how valuable do you think it was for you to start out in a role like that, and especially doing it in a way where you're just working with pro players in the summer and probably being able to, you know, find the areas that you can bring value where there's not a scoreboard on and you can just kind of put your own stamp on it.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up because, my experience, my 4 years before I got to the NHL, 2 of those years were a grind, running my own business, working with players of all ages, boys and girls. I always wanted to continue to work with the best players, but it was never about NHL players at the time. It was, I want to
Yeah.
work with the best and the most competitive and driven people and players, but it wasn't about that. What it was about for me was really carving out my own style of coaching, my own approach, my own method to how I taught, how I ran sessions, how I ran my curriculum. And I think that, when you transition from playing to coaching, you take all of the good with you and you take the bad with you, or the lessons, you
Yeah.
learned and you
Good
learn
point.
from them and then you reinforce in different ways your own self. And so I was very fortunate as a skating coach to have one of the best mentors, David Roy, true pioneer as a skating coach in the game, was my high school coach and someone who kind of taught me everything I knew from the biomechanics of skating. And so I was able to really take a good amount, or a wealth of knowledge that he taught me as a player, but then studied the game and the new game that's developed, in the last 10 years that I didn't play even, or that I was constantly striving for, but, and it's changed a lot. So as I was studying the game and learning different ways to teach, the game has changed so much from a skating and a technical and a tactical aspect, I think, from just straight lines. You see the best skaters aren't always the fastest skaters. They're the most, I think, impactful on their edges, being able to change speeds, be deceptive in small areas, east, west, through the neutral zone. But why I say all that is I think I was able to study that and doing it on my own, I was able to build the knowledge and the resource for myself that I had to rely on only myself. And what I had, in front of me was, a growing clientele base of really good players. But people always ask me, or I got the question a lot of, how'd you get to the NHL when nobody else did it before, or there was no blueprint of how to do it? I said, I didn't have a blueprint to follow. Therefore, there was no recipe for me to success. It was just doing the work that I knew made me a proud coach, and follow that process and keep learning, keep evolving. And instead of knocking on doors for opportunity, I just built my own house and built my own business, and, you know, tried to see who would walk through the door and be buying it. And ultimately, when the NHL players started showing up, I knew they were getting value out of their skates. They were receiving what I was putting forward, and they were the ones that made it very clear to me that my style of coaching and teaching and communicating meant something, and
Yeah.
meant something to them. Then it could mean something to me to believe that this was possible to get into this position someday. But I'm extremely, extremely grateful, because when shit hits the fan, or you, as a coach, you start to, consume yourself in problem solving, as we do, in a season when
Every
things are
day. Yeah.
well, or you get lost in that process. I always go back to what I did in day one, or I always go back to those foundational approaches or concepts or ways that I, you know, tried to be, because that keeps me grounded in, one, who I am, and two, very much focused on the process of what works, because it's tried, it's tested, it worked. Don't try to stray away from, those times. And it's given me, I think, the confidence and the conviction to believe that I belong in this space, and that I can continue to grow and develop from each of these years in the game now.
So, and I just want to highlight, like, for anybody that's listening and doesn't know, like, Kelowna in the off season, I don't know what percentage of the NHL players reside there, but it might be the highest concentration in the summertime and anywhere in the world.
Yes.
And you had a pretty respectable roster of those players jumping on the ice with you. And I think as you point out, it's voluntary. And so I was reading that, and I was like, man, like, when you're in that space, like, you are tinkering with Ferraris.
Yeah.
And the easy thing to do is to say, I'm just going to keep it simple, or at least maybe not simple is the wrong word, but I'm just going to, like, stick to what's safe, and I'm not going to try and innovate too much. What was that process, just as you were, driving home from the rink, to say, you know what, like, I think we could do this drill differently, or, hey, like, I could go up to Brent Seabrook and say, hey, I think, you know what, Brent, like, I don't think you're bending your knees enough. And,
It's
and
there's so many good stories, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, that's, and I mean, listen, I mean, we talk to coaches all the time on the show, but we talk to them a lot in private, and that's an intimidating crowd. Players who are, I think what we're learning more and more is, players today, they've come up, they've received such good coaching, and they can tell really quick if somebody can help them get better or not.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's believability, right? I believed that I could help them. I believed what I was doing, worked, and I think it's one thing that really sticks out with me from all of those years, and this goes through now the American League and even the NHL on a team setting. Um, I got to go back again. Now this is year 5 returning to Kelowna. I do it every year, and it's actually good for me. I kind of measure my own development as a coach every time I do the same guys. And I was Luke Shen's one of the veteran players, and Brent Seabrook I was actually running the camp with, who was one of my very first, clients, and Shea Weber. Those guys are all still around, Andrew Ladd. But these veteran guys who I think kind of came in, they received my coaching as a young coach. I still believe I'm a young coach, but in those first years. And Luke was, saying to me, and he said it back, he's like, "Are these your own drills? I've never done these. These are great." And I was like, "Of course they are. I come up with all my own ideas, concepts, things I've
Yeah,
learned, take pieces from other people. But now that I'm in the NHL, it's like copycat league. Everyone has the same
totally.
drills with a different name, and you just roll them. So I can, run a typical Seattle practice for the guys, and they all know these drills. I call them something different. But that's what you when you get into an environment like the NHL, it's simple and the nature of, the league, and everyone's learning and stealing each other's ideas. But for me, when I entered into that space, I was doing what I knew, and so I was innovative in a way that I was coming up with my own ideas and concepts, and I was prepared to run them to a standard, and so maybe it was the newness, the intrigue, the different voice, the different approach, but something with the guys that I always, and I still very much make an intent before every session is, this is what we're doing today, this is what we're going to get out of it, so lean into it. You can either check in now, or you can go through it and get what you need to get out of it, or you can really lean into these details. And I find just accessing them on a tiny human level, you can get that much more out of the group and the individual by just focusing on some of those communication points. And like you brought up that book, like one of my favorite books is like, start with why am I running this skate, why are we doing this today? And when you teach skating, one of the hardest things to teach, and maybe one of the most boring things that for players to want to work on in the game, you have to get creative on how you sell their process and their buy-in. And so I've been very um, committed to that process as a coach, to stay clear and true to that, because it helped me find success early with veteran guys, younger guys, and now, the dialogue has changed.
So, I can't help but think that there's a version of the Jessica Campbell story where you go start, or you do start a skating company, and things take off and you get some high-end clients in the summertime, and next thing you know, you're running 8 weeks of camp, and then maybe you're the next David Roy at Pursuit of Excellence, and you're living in Kelowna, and that's it. I mean, man, that's definitely not the worst gig in the world. But you decide to go to Sweden.
Yeah.
What was behind that
Well,
decision?
there was a couple people that when I was skating the pro players, coaches locally that wanted to hire me to join their staff, felt I could help their team, and there was still hesitance and resistance of hiring a female coach or hiring me,
Yeah,
regardless of me doing it. And that was frustrating. That was something, I've done a lot of reflecting on of, in my process and in my journey. I had to get over those no's and that resistance of the unknown, of people maybe not willing on a team level or an organization to take that first step to be like, we hired the first female coach for whatever reasons. Doesn't matter what those reasons were, there was no's. And so I actually, like from the beginning, when I, challenged myself, is just focus on your own process, what you can control, bet on yourself, build your own business, see where it takes you. It's not about knocking on doors. Get over that you may have to take an untraditional route. And unlike, many coaches actually finish their career in Europe, I would say,
yeah.
I actually did the reverse, and I had an opportunity to go coach in Sweden in the SHL, one of the top pro league, to work with their junior teams. And quickly, I was getting opportunities with their pro team, and the messaging started getting out there of what I was doing on a skill level, but then on a tactful level, for more the coaching side. And then from Sweden, an opportunity came in Germany. And I can't speak Swedish and I can't speak German at all. But what I found was I was able to fill a void, or there was an opportunity there for me to come into a space where that type of coaching was needed, skills coaching, but then also someone who could understand the game systematically. And I honestly, if you would have told me 5 years ago what was my goal in the game, would be player development, to be a skating skills coach in the NHL. And when I got to Germany, everything changed because I entered into Nuremberg DL team as coming in as this player development coach. And pretty quickly, Tom Rowe, I call him one of my green lights, who gave me the first
Love that.
opportunity. They were
Yeah.
they were struggling offensively with the team, and he's like, "Hey, you're here. I know to do this, but could you look at some of our ozone stuff, our power play? Tell me what you see." And so I did a deep dive, as I like to do, and presented him a whole pitch of here's what I think could help the team. And he's like, great, the power play is yours in practice tomorrow, and I need you to come on the bench,
No way.
come to Munich, and we're playing one of the top teams in the league tomorrow night, and I need you on the bench. So call it crazy or not. I mean, I thought he was crazy because, I'm coming in to do something completely not unrelated to special teams, but it was interesting because that's when it really clicked for me. And that was my aha moment of the switch, because I realized that at this level, these pros, these guys, you give them an idea and a concept. They have the tools and the skill set to go out and execute it. They need the guided plan. Like, they don't need you to tell them, they need you to guide them there. And I think that's something important for like all coaches listening this to think about is like, are you telling or are you guiding? There's a difference of just
Yeah. Great point.
telling a player information versus actually guiding them to understand it, because it comes back to the process of how you retain, how you embrace that and actually can live that out in an actionable way. And so I found the guys were really buying into this new idea of what I was bringing them. They were excited about it. They were hungry for maybe a different voice. And I kid you not, that night in Munich, we won that game. We scored close to 8 goals. I don't know what the final score was, but talked about they were in a scoring slump. The power play, we made a couple adjustments, not much, and they scored within 8 seconds off the face off. And guys on the bench are turning, pointing at me. And I'm like, I never at any point in my career as a player pointed at a coach like, that was you, because they did it. But I think they were just so excited and eager for some new ideas. And Tom was unbelievable for me, because that moment was everything for me, because I realized, you know what, this is the best feeling in the world when you can blend your skill set, or like the way I was able to break down the game, but then apply it to their system and see them have success. That's when I knew I wanted to shift to being behind the bench.
Couple thoughts here. That's an amazing story. And when you talk about the players pointed you on the bench, like just being around the game, my interpretation of that is the players appreciating the trust that you put in them and recognizing the moment. And it's less about saying, hey, this is because of you, but it's like, hey, we just appreciate you. And and I think that's the great part about our game, that I think it really embraces that. I'd be curious to know, like, have you ever talked to Tom Rowe after? Like, well, I'm sure you have, but have you said, hey, like, because we can pretend that that wasn't a gutsy decision on his part, but that was a gutsy decision on his part.
Absolutely.
You know,
Oh, totally. No, absolutely. Tom from there, actually, the German national team
Tony.
coach, Tony, yeah, unbelievable. Tony Soderholm, another unbelievable mentor, friend, and
Yeah.
ally. He was at that game, and he reached out to some of their veteran German guys and asked them what was going on, and they said positive things and were allies to me. And then Tony picked up the phone and asked Tom and asked me, and then he was interviewing me. I flew back actually to Chicago at that time, and 2 weeks later, Tony's like, "Can you come join us at World Championships with the German national team?" And so I went into Nuremberg, thinking I was going to help their team with skating and skills, to being on the bench with special teams with the German national team 4 months later. And yeah, it's crazy when I think about all of what happened so quickly, but ultimately, I think it was just a nod to the power of having a plan, believing in that plan, and delivering it in a way where it's about the player's success. Like, the worst advice is fake it till you make it. You can only fake it for the window of space or time that you're really given, until you completely lose it. And I think I've never tried to fake it. I'm terrible at that. And I try to be very raw and real and vulnerable with players in the communication. Like, I'm the first to be like, I fucked that up. Sorry for lack of language, but I messed it up. Like, let's get back to work and we're going to figure this out. And I think that's the humanness that needs to come out more in coach to player relationships. So that if you walk the talk, then you're giving them permission to do the same. That's a huge, huge place of empowerment.
I can't imagine what last year was like for you. And I have a tough time wrapping my head around what the last 5 years have been like, just from even the non high, like you said, like different countries, languages, a whole host of things. And it seems like the plan was changing on the fly in a good way, obviously. But you know, through this process, it's probably not lost on you that one person on the bench looks different than everybody else.
Yeah.
And I and the article that stood out to me was there was an article written about the suit that you wore in game one with Seattle.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm thinking like no other NHL coach, head coach or assistant coach, as far as I can tell, has
Ever been
ever had to go and like
colors.
answer that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, I mean, I know that, and we'll stick with the NHL, but like at that level, like, I mean, we deal with coaches in your league all the time. Like, they can tell you what they're doing on a Tuesday in January right now. Like they absolutely cut through distractions. And I can only imagine, just from the mental side of it, just knowing that, hey, like on one hand, I got to go be a coach, but also just managing this other side of it, of knowing that there's probably more eyeballs on you than the average AC. How do you, if you don't mind sharing, like how have you learned to manage with that?
Well, it's I'd be denying the fact if I didn't acknowledge it. I'm glad we're talking about it because there's 2 ways to talk about it. It's like to bring it more into the process of a thing or to call it out as something that is real. And I think that a lot of people have, you know, commended me the last year saying, "You broke barriers, thank you." I'm like, "No, no, no, the barriers are real. Like, we're in them now. We're now we're feeling it. I'm feeling it because these are the things like what we're talking about exactly. These are the things that are not yet normal occurrences. These are the things that we or I have to move through to get it to a normal place where, like Tony once said to me, I board a flight, I don't see a female pilot and grab my bags and go the other way. I trust she knows what she's doing and I get on my with my way.
Such a great,
Here
yeah.
we are. I'm asking Jessica about her suit color. Thankfully, I love fashion, so I'm willing to answer the question. But but it's back to your point. You're like, really? Were we really talking to her about that? When I love these podcasts, these conversations around real hockey because this is what my passion is. But we're on our way, and I always try to reframe it for myself that what this is important to go through because one is making me a better person, a stronger person, a better coach if I can move through it. But I think about, hopefully the outcome for others of where we're going if, that's where my focus stays. So then it allows me to ground back into like what actually matters, which is my coaching. And it kind of comes into like imposter syndrome and when you're constantly being called out for being
and
different, it's
and
like
I think but I think I would say this. I think that every coach that walks into an American Hockey League dressing room for the first time, or goes on the ice with a bunch of NHL players for the first time, they feel that same thing.
totally,
Like that's,
absolutely. And that's where I think it can feed that because when you know you're different, like I don't wake up in the morning and think about how I'm a different coach. I go to the rink, I put on my tracksuit, I lace up my skates. I know I'm different, of course, but I actually think that I've been able to learn through my journey now that actually what makes me different is my greatest strength. And I know that with the Kraken, that is appreciated and something that I think when you think about taking this back to kind of the example of what you shine light on. I've been asked this year, they welcome to the NHL moment or what was that moment, and it reminds me of the opening night because when I stood behind the bench in the last 3 to 4 years, I've stood in many arenas behind a lot of loud German chanting, you know, and American League, Calder Cup finals, felt every emotion you could feel.
yeah.
Overtime, timeouts, you name it. Game 7, triple over. I've felt it. And that game, the opening night this year hit differently. because the reaction from our fan base and our community of 18,000 fans screaming, exploding the roof when my name was announced hit me like a ton of bricks, because I realized that exactly what you're saying. This is so much more than coaching. What I'm doing right now, I'm standing in a space no woman has ever stood before, but I feel so ready, excited, and passionate about being here. But it was that wave of, wow, this is redefining leadership right now for everybody witnessing this, and I have to hold this space proudly, but embrace it as the biggest challenge that I'll ever do in my career, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm super grateful and humbled to even be in this position, but I've worked really hard at it, and I always come back to the work and the process and the journey, and it's the people and the guys and the ones that showed up along the way that encouraged me, that helped me get to this point mentally and professionally.
I grew up with a single mom and, didn't go to university or anything, but she became pretty successful in business and ran her own company. And so growing up, I think, the eyes are so powerful, right? Like it never occurred to me till I was probably a teenager that women couldn't lead.
Mhm.
It's what I saw every single day.
Right.
And then, so I think about that moment where I think there's a compounding effect that the more we hear women speak, get in front of people on stage, that the narrative or the opportunities, the doors can open, I think, really quickly. But it's, again, I'd be lying if I said I had any inclination of what it's like going first. I would also note that, in pro hockey, like that's a winning league. Like there's no, as far as I can tell, it's not a favor league either. Um,
Yeah, definitely about wins and losses.
no, it is
We
for
all know
sure.
that.
The one part, I guess, the gap, I try to connect some dots and say, like, how do you go from Germany to Coachella Valley? And I couldn't find, like, usually there's, it's coaching. So it's that, what's the Kevin Bacon game, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? Like you can always figure out how people end up in their roles, but you just seem to, I couldn't find the connection there.
Well, interesting enough, when I got to the German national team at World Championships, some more noise, televised event. Dan Balsma was recently, at the time, I obviously didn't know this, but at the time he was recently hired by the Kraken to take Coachella Valley into the inaugural season. So 3 years ago. And Dan was watching World Championships. He had a relationship, I believe, with Mo Sider. I don't, he won't ever tell me which player he called. I'm assuming it's Mo. Maybe it was Groovy. I'm not sure, but he coached Mo obviously in Detroit for some time, and he also, Ron Francis played with Tom Rowe, so there was some connection pieces there. But um, yeah, he saw me behind the bench, and he tells the story. He was sitting with Davis Payne, Winnipeg Jets coach, one of his good friends. They were talking about his coaching network for the American League, and he mostly worked with guys in the NHL up until then. So he didn't have a huge database. And so Davis said, "Why don't you interview her, see what that would be like?" And he did. And we went into a length of interviews. And I truly believe I got the job because of my background in player development. That was a big piece of why I got the American League job, was mostly to come in to obviously know to develop prospects, and that I was doing it on my own gave Dan, not, it wasn't necessarily about the German stuff, and thankfully Mo Sider, I believe, helped push that along as well.
Unreal. Unreal. Um,
Well,
what,
I'm glad you bring it up, because when I left World Championships, I had no idea what was next.
were you going back to Nuremberg or you didn't
No,
know?
I no, and that was, there was still some hesitance to hire me full time, and so I was pretty unsure of what was my next step after Worlds, and I was kind of living on this high of, like, I got a taste of working with the best on the biggest stage for me at that time, and um, I knew I could do it. I just didn't know what would be the right fit. So when Dan Bosma called, we laughed at that. I thought it was spam mail, but it was real, and pretty quickly it all happened. So I'm extremely grateful, because I think it's the power of one coach and one ally. And for the coaches that are listening to this, it's, you have to think about, are you an ally, and who are your allies, and how important allyship is in empowering your staff. Like if you're a head coach, your assistant coaches are your biggest asset. And if you're not empowering them to make you and your team the best that you can be, then you're not using them correctly. And Dan really gave me my first platform to be the best coach that I could be at the pro level, and to do it with a really good team group of guys in Coachella Valley to find success together. But he didn't just open the door. I always say he walked through the door with me and gave me the tools where I needed support, and learned and listened to me. And I think that gave me all of what I needed to stay on my path to keep getting better.
Yeah, as we close here, Jess, you use the term with Tom Rowe, Greenlight. Love that. Just while you have the opportunity, who might be some of the other green lights in your career? And I sense that we talk about the consistency that all, or the traits that all goal scorers have, and I think that all good coaches have a lot of green lights throughout their career.
Yeah, well, I think from my well, David Roy was the very first coach, mentor. Leo Parker, all the way back to minor league days. But the players, for me, Brent Seabrook was huge. I think he said to me at one point, "You're going to coach in the NHL," and he mirrored belief in me for me that I maybe didn't believe was possible, and made it very real that I could believe up this crazy scenario to coach in the NHL someday. And same thing with the other veteran guys, Luke Shen, Shea Weber, that showed up. And then when I got to Europe, it was Thomas Collar at SHL, um, Tom Rowe, Tony Soderholm, and then obviously, Dan Balsman and the entire Kraken organization. Ron Francis, some of those early conversations were massive for me to keep that, conversation belief going. And now Ken Hitchcock, he's been a huge mentor for me, and support, and again, just resource, someone that's, very committed to helping me try to find as much success in this game as possible, knowing what could come.
Amazing. And then last one, you mentioned Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Any other resources, books that you would recommend to coaches out there that they can invest some
Uh,
time in?
yeah, so Start With Why, great book. Just thinking of things I just read recently. The Ideal Teammate, another really good one. One book I love, Stillness is Key, Ryan Holiday,
Yeah, that's good.
great book. Yeah, those would be 3 that are very fresh, recent, that I and another one that, even for players, that it's a deep book and you need to give it the space, but Untethered Soul. I think there's a lot of mental skills components to that book. It's deep if you're willing to go there, but it's a highlight and read, and I think things to really understand some of those human aspects of psychology that happens as athletes, as coaches, and as people who are working with high performers.
Awesome. Jess, it's been great. Thank you so
Oh,
much. Thanks
thank
for sharing your
you.
story.
Very grateful to share.
And good luck while you get in the thick of it here these next few weeks.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you guys.